The sacrificed children at Chichen Itza were not random victims, and their DNA proved it. The old picture was easier to hold: a sacred city, a deep cenote, anonymous bodies offered to powers beyond the human world. For decades, many people imagined the victims as young girls, foreign captives, or nameless offerings taken from somewhere outside the city. Then the sealed Chultun changed the case. Near the sacred cenote complex at Chichen Itza, archaeologists studied an underground chamber filled with the remains of dozens of children. The bones were small. The context was ritual. The questions had been waiting for a long time. But in 2024, a study published in Nature analyzed ancient DNA from 64 subadult remains connected to that burial context, and the answer moved beyond what bone alone could prove. The genome could identify biological sex. It could show kinship. It could trace origin. It could reveal repeated patterns of selection inside a deposit that had once looked like a mass of nameless dead. The chamber did not give back their voices. It gave back relationships. That is why the discovery is so hard to face. The disturbing part was not only that children had been sacrificed. Archaeology already knew ritual killing existed in ancient Mesoamerica. The sharper wound was this: the children were not an accidental collection. Their DNA showed that someone, inside that ancient world, was choosing in patterns. The bones raised the question. The genome made the question stricter. The caveat matters here. This is not a claim about modern Maya people. It is not a judgment on the worth of an ancient civilization. It gives no one permission to flatten Maya religion into a story of cruelty, or to treat living descendants as responsible for rituals performed more than 1,000 years ago. Ancient societies were not simple machines of violence. At Chichen Itza, ritual life was tied to water, rain, fertility, political authority, the underworld, and sacred geography. The sacred cenote was not just a hole in the ground. In a limestone land where rivers often vanished underground, cenotes could look like entrances into another order of reality. None of that softens the fact that the victims were children. A careful account has to hold both truths at the same time. The ritual system had meaning to the people who built it, and the remains still deserve care because they belong to young human beings, not symbols placed in a display case for modern shock. Ancient DNA is powerful because it can read evidence that bone shape cannot always keep. In some skeletons, the petrous part of the temporal bone, a dense piece near the inner ear, protects fragments of DNA better than softer parts of the body. Teeth and other dense skeletal material can also hold traces. In a lab, those fragments are sequenced, cleaned, compared, and checked against contamination. The result is not a full person, it is a broken archive. From that archive, scientists compare markers across chromosomes. They can look at mitochondrial DNA, which passes through the maternal line. They can examine Y chromosome evidence in males. They can measure relatedness by asking how much of the genome two individuals share in the same long blocks. That evidence answers narrow questions. Was this child genetically male or female? Were two children siblings? Did they share a parent? Did they come from a population related to people nearby or from somewhere far away? Did later descendants carry immune variants shaped by disease? It cannot tell everything. DNA cannot recover fear. It cannot tell whether a child understood what was happening. It cannot show whether a family resisted, accepted, grieved in public, or grieved in silence. It cannot translate the prayers spoken above the chamber. It cannot decide the full ritual meaning of an offering. The bones, the artifacts, the chamber, the dates, the myths, and descendant communities still matter. The genome is one witness. It is not the whole court. With those limits in place, the first genetic result becomes more powerful because it overturns one of the oldest popular assumptions about who these sacrificed children were. The first model broke at biological sex. For a long time, public imagination around Maya sacrifice leaned toward a familiar image: young female victims thrown into sacred water, offered to rain gods, or taken as anonymous tribute. That picture had roots. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza had produced human remains, precious objects, and centuries of speculation. Early interpretations often mixed archaeology with colonial accounts, myth, and modern expectation. But the 2024 Nature study found something more specific in the analyzed group from the Chultun. All the genetically tested children in that set were male. That does not mean every sacrificial victim at every Maya site was male. It does not erase evidence from other contexts. It does not turn one deposit into a rule for an entire civilization. It means this chamber had a pattern. The difference matters. If a ritual deposit contains boys again and again, then the old image of random victims starts to fail. If those boys were placed in a chamber near one of the most charged sacred spaces in the Maya world, then the pattern demands an explanation. The second layer was stranger. DNA did not stop at sex. It showed close biological relationships among the children. Some were relatives. Some shared enough genetic material to point towards sibling relationships. And among them were at least 2 pairs of identical twins. Identical twins are not simply siblings born at the same time. In genetic terms, they come from the same fertilized egg, which splits early in development. Their genomes match with an intimacy ordinary siblings do not share. Brothers can resemble each other. Identical twins carry nearly the same genome across almost every chromosome. In the lab, that relationship is visible, not as a feeling, not as a family memory, as shared genetic variants stretching across the genome in the same pattern. That evidence changes the chamber. A pile of bones can look anonymous after time has broken the bodies apart. Small skull fragments, teeth, ribs, and long bones may show age, nutrition, injury, and sometimes disease. They can tell archaeologists that children were present. They cannot always say which children belong to the same household. Ancient DNA can. When the results showed relatives and identical twins, the deposit stopped looking like a random sweep of captives. It began to look like selection. Not selection in the modern moral sense of preference or worth, but selection as a ritual choice made by people inside a specific belief system. Someone cared about who these children were. That sentence is difficult because it does not make the act less violent. It makes it more intimate. The children were not interchangeable bodies. Some carried kinship into the chamber with them. Radiocarbon evidence in archaeological context placed the use of the deposit across the classic to post-classic Maya period, with Chichen Itza rising as a major ritual and political center in the first millennium and into the early second millennium. This was not one terrible afternoon frozen in time. The chamber belonged to a longer ritual pattern. That span makes the DNA more unsettling. A one-time crisis could be explained as chaos, war, famine, or emergency. A repeated deposit near a sacred complex suggests memory. It suggests a practice people return to. Male children, close kin, twin pairs. A ritual chamber. The question then changes. It is no longer only, why were children sacrificed? It becomes, why these children, and why together? If sex and kinship were patterned, the next problem was origin. Were these boys taken from distant communities? Were they foreign captives moved across the peninsula as tribute? Or did the chamber hold children from the world around Chichen Itza itself? The evidence points in a narrower direction. Genome-wide ancestry from the studied remains linked the children closely to ancient and present-day Maya populations from the region. They did not look like an unrelated group dragged in from a faraway land with no connection to the Yucatan. Their genetic profile fit a local world. That finding matters because captivity has often been the easy explanation for sacrifice. If the victims were outsiders, the moral distance feels larger. A city kills strangers, a state displays power, a ritual destroys enemies. But local ancestry changes the emotional weight. It does not prove every child was born within sight of the pyramid. It does not identify their houses. It does mean the deposit was tied genetically to the region, not to a completely foreign population. Picture the setting without the postcard frame. Chichen Itza sits in northern Yucatan, in a limestone landscape where water disappears into the ground. Cenotes puncture the surface like windows into dark reservoirs. Around them were fields of maize, stone roads, temples, platforms, markets, and routes of ritual movement. The sacred cenote was part of a ceremonial geography where water, death, and authority met. In that world, a chultun was not only storage space. These underground chambers could be practical, symbolic, or both, depending on context. A sealed chamber near a sacred complex could become a place where bodies and offerings were placed below the visible world. The genome kept one more record. When the children's sex, kinship, and regional ancestry are placed together, the pattern becomes too specific to ignore. Male children appear in the analyzed group. Close relatives appear. Identical twins appear. The deposit is ritual. The city is one of the most powerful Maya centers of its era. That does not prove one exact motive. Archaeology rarely gives that kind of clean answer, but it narrows the field. The Popol Vuh, recorded after the Spanish conquest but carrying older Quiche Maya mythic traditions, tells of the hero twins, brothers who descend into the underworld, face death, trick the lords below, and return with transformed power. Twin imagery had sacred force in Mesoamerican thought. Pairs, brothers, descent, death, and return were not ordinary themes. The Chichen Itza DNA does not prove priests were reenacting the Popol Vuh line by line. The text comes from a different Maya tradition and a later written record. A responsible account cannot flatten all Maya peoples into one script or treat myth as a direct police report. But the genetic pattern makes twin symbolism hard to dismiss. If a ritual world gave special force to paired male figures, then identical twins and male kin could have carried meaning beyond their age. The boys may have been seen through a sacred logic that modern viewers can only partly reconstruct. That logic may have joined underworld belief, political power, rain, fertility, and the dangerous prestige of offering what was most precious. The DNA does not tell us the prayer. It tells us the selection was real. The case becomes more disturbing when the strongest human scene is not a king, a priest, or a battlefield. It is two boys whose genomes were nearly mirror images. The Chultun at Chichen Itza was a sealed chamber of repeated offerings. By the time archaeologists examined it, the human story had been reduced to small remains, soil, fragments, and context. Time had done what time always does. It had taken skin, hair, voices, names, and the ordinary movements of childhood. What remained were bones. A child's bone can speak, but only in limits. Teeth can suggest age. Long bones can show growth. Skulls can preserve marks of trauma or reshaping. Chemical traces can hint at diet. The position of remains can suggest whether bodies were placed carefully, disturbed later, or gathered from earlier deposits. Still, bone alone often leaves people as categories. Subadult, male or female if the skeleton is old enough and preserved well enough. Possible trauma, possible disease, possible ritual context. The lab changed that vocabulary. When ancient DNA was extracted from the remains, the analysis did not search for one dramatic gene. It compared thousands and thousands of markers across the genome. If two children shared the same maternal line, mitochondrial DNA could show one clue. If two boys shared a paternal line, the Y chromosome could add another. But identical twins require something stronger. Their whole genomes line up with extraordinary closeness. That is what made the twin pairs so striking. These were not merely children with the same broad ancestry. They were not merely boys from the same region. They were not merely members of a population that shared ancient roots. Their genomes carried the pattern of lives that began from the same embryo. The chamber had turned them into archaeological material. DNA turned them back into relatives. No responsible narrator should invent their names. No one should describe their final thoughts as if the chamber preserved them. We do not know whether they walked, were carried, resisted, were prepared, were honored, or were terrified. We do not know what their mothers, fathers, siblings, or neighbors were told. The genome does not give permission to imagine too much. But it does give permission to stop imagining too little. Two identical twins are not an abstract data point. They may have slept under the same roof. They may have eaten from the same hearth. They may have been recognized by everyone around them as a pair before any ritual specialist ever saw them as a sign. Their bodies entered the same sacred system, and their genetic relationship was still visible more than a millennium later. That is the forensic reversal at the heart of the case. Before DNA, 64 subadult remains could be written as a number, a burial category, a ritual deposit, a population sample. After DNA, the same group contained boys, relatives, siblings, and twins. The number did not disappear, it became heavier. Ancient DNA often works this way. It does not restore the whole person, it sharpens the outline of what was taken. In a battlefield grave, it can separate soldiers from strangers. In a plague cemetery, it can identify family clusters. In a royal tomb, it can expose dynastic marriage. In this chultun, it showed that children offered in a ritual setting were connected before death. That connection is what makes selection feel personal. A random group can be explained by opportunity. A kin pattern suggests criteria. Identical twins suggest a ritual value attached to paired life. The presence of multiple close relatives suggests that family bonds did not end at the edge of the chamber. They entered with the bodies. The old map of the case was too flat. It showed a city, a sacred place, and children. The new map shows the invisible lines between them, brother to brother, twin to twin, local community to ritual center. That is where the old story becomes unreliable. Not because archaeology was wrong to identify sacrifice, but because the category sacrifice was too broad to carry the human detail. It described the act. It did not describe the relationships inside the act. The twins explain why the deposit was not random. But the deepest genetic proof reaches beyond the chamber, into living descendants and into another catastrophe written centuries later. The 2024 study compared the ancient genomes from Chichen Itza with present-day Maya people from the region. The results showed genetic continuity. That means modern communities in the area carry ancestry related to people who lived near the ancient city. Continuity does not mean sameness. No population stands still for 1,000 years. Families move, communities merge, languages shift. Colonial violence breaks records and relocates people. But genetic continuity means the ancient children were not from a vanished, unrelated world. Their ancestry still has living connections. That finding carries a moral demand. The remains are not only ancient specimens, they are part of a history connected to descendants. Any study of them has to be careful with language, permissions, interpretation, and public storytelling. The people most closely connected to the past are not props in a mystery. They are communities with their own memory, scholarship, and rights. Then, the genome opened a second record. Researchers also examined immune-related genetic variation in present-day Maya populations, including signals in the HLA region. HLA genes help the immune system recognize what belongs in the body and what may be dangerous. They are part of the body's identification system, a biological checkpoint that can shape survival during epidemics. Selection is simple in principle and brutal in history. When disease kills unevenly, some inherited variants can become more common in later generations because the people who carried them were more likely to survive and have children. The variant does not make a person superior. It does not make a group chosen. It only means death did not fall evenly. In the Americas, after European contact, death fell with catastrophic force. Colonial-era epidemics tore through indigenous populations who faced new pathogens, forced labor, warfare, displacement, famine, and social collapse. Ancient DNA research from epidemic cemeteries in Mexico has linked Salmonella enterica, a bacterial pathogen, to devastating outbreaks during the colonial period. That evidence belongs to a later chapter than the sacrifices at Chichen Itza. But it shows how genomes can preserve traces of disaster long after written records fail or blame the victims. The distinction is important. Immune selection after contact is not an explanation for why the children were sacrificed. It does not reach backward and solve the ritual motive. It is a separate layer in the archive. One layer records ritual death in an ancient Maya city. Another records survival after colonial disease pressure. Both are written in DNA. They are not the same story, but they belong to the same long human record. That is why the Chichen Itza case is larger than a chamber. The children's genomes revealed who was selected in one ritual world, Descendant genomes revealed how later communities carried ancestry through another world of violence, epidemic disease, and survival. The same genetic archive that identifies twins in a chultun can also show how living populations endured forces that tried to erase them. The opening question now has a narrower answer. The victims were not anonymous symbols. In the analyzed group, they were genetically male children. Some were close relatives, some were identical twins. Their ancestry fit the region around Chichen Itza. Their placement belonged to a ritual system shaped by sacred geography, kinship, underworld symbolism, and power. That answer is disturbing because it is specific. General violence can become distant. A category can protect the viewer. Human sacrifice, ancient ritual, Maya city, archaeological deposit. These phrases create distance. They sound like museum labels. DNA removes some of that distance. It does not show faces. It does not supply names. It does not reconstruct a final hour. But it makes the group less anonymous. It shows that one child was not merely beside another child. He was related to him. It shows that two boys were not merely similar in age. They were identical twins. It shows that the chamber did not simply contain outsiders without a local story. It held children genetically connected to the region. The responsible conclusion has to stay inside the evidence. Ancient DNA revealed that the sampled child victims from this Chichen Itza context were genetically male. It revealed close relatives among them. It identified identical twin pairs. It showed regional Maya ancestry rather than a distant, unrelated captive population. It made random taking a weaker explanation for this deposit and pattern selection a stronger one. But the evidence has boundaries. DNA cannot tell whether families consented. It cannot tell how each child was chosen. It cannot show whether selection happened through tribute, family obligation, priestly decision, elite control, war, devotion, coercion, or some combination that no modern category fits cleanly. It cannot prove that every Maya sacrificial context followed this pattern. It cannot prove that every child sacrifice at Chichen Itza had the same meaning. It cannot reduce the deposit to the hero twins alone, even though the presence of male kin and identical twins makes twin symbolism relevant. Myth helps interpret. It does not replace evidence. Archaeology works best when different witnesses are forced to answer each other. Bones give age, trauma, preservation, and bodily context. Artifacts show what was placed nearby. Stratigraphy shows how layers formed. Radiocarbon dates place events in time. Inscriptions and colonial texts offer language, memory, and political claims, but they also carry bias. Living descendant communities bring knowledge that is not stored in a lab freezer. Genomes add another witness. They identify sex, kinship, origin, and some inherited variants. They can show selection pressure in descendants. They can reveal relationships that no inscription bothered to record. The most careful truth is also the hardest one. What was disturbing in the chultun was not only death, it was the pattern hidden inside the dead. Return to the chamber near the sacred cenote, and the case looks different now. The famous pyramid is not the center of this story. The center is underground, in a sealed place where children were placed after selection by rules that are only partly visible. The old public image gave us anonymous victims. The DNA gave us boys, relatives, twins, regional ancestry, and a second record of survival in descendant genomes. That is a different kind of horror. Quieter, more exact. It shows that ancient DNA can make the past less comfortable by making it less vague. It can take a number like 64 subadults and reveal that the number contained family. It can show that a ritual deposit was not only a scene of death, but a scene where kinship itself may have been part of the offering. No hierarchy belongs here. No mockery. No purity myth. No claim that one people can be reduced to one ancient practice, or that genetics can judge the worth of a civilization. Only evidence handled carefully. The genome cannot preserve everything bones, tablets, and family stories lost. But sometimes it preserves the line that matters most. Who was connected to whom, where they came from, and how survival continued after catastrophe. Subscribe to the Genome Archive for more ancient DNA cold cases, population genetics, and the parts of human history that were never fully written down.